She stepped into the Jade store with nothing more than the quiet hope of finding something beautiful, a simple piece of jewelry to mark a milestone. Before we continue the story, comment what city you're watching us from. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications if you enjoy stories like this. The sun outside painted the world with golden hues, but inside, the cold air of indifference quickly became her reality. She stood there, gazing at the glass display cases filled with jade pendants and bracelets, each one more stunning than the last. It was supposed to be a peaceful moment, a moment of calm. Yet, she felt it. The way the air grew thick, the whispers behind her back, the eyes that seemed to size her up in ways that she could not understand. Before she could even make a decision, the cold, harsh voice of the manager cut through the room. "You don't belong here." The words struck her like a slap, not because they were loud, but because they were delivered with a contempt so sharp it pierced deep into her heart. A few awkward moments passed, but the tension only built. The employees, two of them, exchanged looks, exchanging glances that were anything but friendly. Mariah's face flushed with embarrassment as they began to circle her. The words were escalating. Insults, snide remarks, judging eyes, until the moment broke. The manager's voice was cold. "Leave. Now. We don't serve people like you here." She was escorted out by security, the front door slamming behind her with a finality that felt like the closing of a chapter she never chose to be a part of. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath quickening as the weight of what had just happened sank in. She was just a woman in a simple dress, a woman who had come in search of something beautiful, yet she was thrown out like a piece of trash. The tears came without warning. She stood there, the humiliation too much to bear, the injustice of it so raw that her legs wobbled beneath her. It was then that a voice from behind the store door, the voice of an onlooker who had witnessed everything, murmured to someone on the phone. "Do you know who that was?" There was a brief silence before a name was mentioned, a name that would change everything. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly known, was that she wasn't just any woman. She wasn't just someone who could be thrown out without consequence. The woman they had so coldly rejected was married to the man who owned the very business that had just humiliated her. Her husband wasn't just another wealthy businessman. He was Ezekiel Stone, the quiet billionaire whose name was known but rarely spoken. But he was the one who signed the paychecks. He was the one who could bring the store to its knees in an instant. But they didn't know that, and they had no idea just how much they were about to pay for their mistake. This wasn't just a story of one woman's humiliation. This was the beginning of a lesson in justice that would echo through Willow City for years to come. You won't want to miss what comes next. Have you ever been judged unfairly? Share your story in the comments below. This one is for you. And if you believe justice always wins, hit the like button so more people can see this story and learn what happens when judgment goes too far. Mariah Stone lived in River Heights, Texas, a quiet town nestled between the rolling hills of the countryside, a place where everyone knew everyone's name and secrets were few. She wasn't the type to seek attention. No, Mariah was simple, content with her life, grateful for the blessings she had. She spent her days tending to her home, caring for her garden, and preparing meals for her husband. Life was uncomplicated for her until that fateful day in the Jade store. To the outside world, Mariah was the picture of serenity. A modest woman, married to Ezekiel Stone, a man who had built a small empire from the ground up. But unlike most wealthy men, Ezekiel was never boastful. His wealth, though vast, was something that remained in the background, almost unnoticed. He was a quiet man, devout in his faith, and always striving to do what was right, even if it meant going against the grain of society. They lived in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, yes, but they didn't live the life most would expect. Their home was humble, their lifestyle grounded in values that had been passed down through generations of Stones. Ezekiel and Mariah never sought the spotlight, and that's how they both liked it. But beneath the surface of their peaceful existence was a truth that Mariah had yet to discover. Ezekiel Stone was not just any businessman. He wasn't just a quiet philanthropist. He was a silent king in his own right, powerful, influential, and respected by people in positions she couldn't begin to fathom. Mariah had no idea. She didn't need to know. To her, Ezekiel was simply the man who held her hand as they prayed together every night, the man who walked with her through every trial, the man who treated her with a love so pure it could only be divine. She never needed more than that. To her, his success was just a byproduct of his faith and hard work. She never asked about his dealings or the people he crossed paths with. She simply trusted that God had blessed them for a reason. But that day, as she was thrown out of the Jade store, everything would change. Her life, her understanding of everything she thought she knew about herself and her husband, everything would be torn apart, only to be rebuilt in a way she never could have imagined. The truth was coming, but Mariah couldn't see it yet. She thought she was just a housewife. She thought her purpose was simply to care for her home, her husband, and the people around her. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that God had placed her beside a king whose power was more than just wealth. It was in his character, his quiet authority, and his unwavering faith. A king who would stop at nothing to protect what was his. And in the end, that meant more than just business deals or fortune. It meant justice. It meant redemption. And Mariah would be at the heart of it all. If you've ever felt like life was preparing you for something bigger, type God's timing in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. Because this story isn't just about revenge, it's about redemption. You won't want to miss what happens next. In the early mornings, before the sun had fully risen, Mariah could be found in the garden behind her modest home. The earth cool beneath her feet as she carefully tended to the flowers she had planted with her own hands. The garden wasn't just a hobby for her. It was a reflection of her life. Each seed, each flower, required patience, attention, and care. And every bloom that emerged felt like a small gift from God. Her days were simple, yet deeply meaningful. Mariah woke early to pray and thank God for the gift of another day, the gift of life, and the gift of Ezekiel's quiet love. She would then prepare breakfast for her husband, always making sure he had everything he needed before he left for his business dealings. But Mariah wasn't just a wife. She wasn't defined by her role alone. She was a woman of purpose, a woman who believed deeply in the power of service. In the afternoons, she could often be found volunteering at Willow City's small but vibrant church. Whether it was organizing the food pantry or setting up for community events, she was always there, ready to give whatever she could. Her smile was warm, her spirit humble, and though she never asked for recognition, she had a way of making people feel seen. Though, in many ways, she often felt overlooked herself. Willow City, though charming, was a place where wealth and status defined people in ways that were hard to ignore. The elite in the city, those who frequented the fancy boutiques, the exclusive restaurants, the grand parties, often looked right past her. She was a woman of simplicity, of faith, and to them, that made her invisible. She didn't mind. In her heart, she knew her worth wasn't determined by what others saw. But still, there were days when she would ask herself, "Lord, am I really doing enough? Am I seen?" On the days when she wasn't volunteering, she would take long walks through the town. Her feet would carry her to places she rarely visited. But today, she found herself walking down the cobbled streets of downtown Willow City, her steps slow and purposeful, the sun warm on her face. She passed the usual shops, coffee shops, bookstores, and small clothing boutiques. But today, her attention was drawn to the small Jade store tucked away between two buildings. It wasn't a place she had ever visited before, but there was something about it that caught her eye. Mariah stood there, gazing at the store's window display, mesmerized by a particular pendant, a simple green cross, its jade smooth and glistening in the light. It was beautiful in a way that resonated deep within her spirit. She felt a connection to it, though she couldn't explain why. It was as though that cross was a symbol of the prayer she had been whispering for so long, the prayer that lingered in her heart. "Lord," she whispered softly to herself, "I don't want riches. I just want to be seen. I want to know that I'm doing what you've called me to do, that my life matters. Please, show me the purpose you've placed in my heart." The cross seemed to shine brighter with every word, as if in answer to her prayer. She reached up to touch the glass, her fingers lightly tracing the smooth surface as she gazed longingly at the pendant. But life, as it always did, had other plans. The store was so close, yet out of reach, like a dream that remained just beyond her grasp. Little did Mariah know, this moment would be the catalyst for something far greater than she could ever have imagined. That pendant, that prayer, those quiet moments of longing, God was about to reveal something far more profound than she ever realized. Her life, though simple, was about to intersect with something much larger. A world of power, influence, and unexpected justice. A world where her quiet faith would become the source of a tidal wave that would change Willow City forever. If you've ever prayed that kind of prayer, comment Amen. Sometimes all we need is for God to see us and guide us. Tag someone who needs a reminder that God sees them, even when people don't. His timing is always perfect. The moment Mariah stepped through the door of the Jade store, she felt a flutter in her chest. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered, a small sound that seemed to echo in the still air of the luxurious boutique. The store was a world of its own, elegant displays of rare jade jewelry, glistening in the soft light, and rich velvet-lined shelves that housed treasures beyond her wildest dreams. It was nothing like the simple life she was used to, and yet, something about this place felt like it was meant to be part of her story. The cross pendant had stayed in her mind, tugging at her heart. She had been so excited to finally see it in person, to hold it, even for just a moment. But from the second she walked in, she felt something was wrong. The employees, who were busy arranging the jewels, looked up, their faces freezing for a split second before they went back to their work, clearly uninterested in helping her. The atmosphere shifted, subtly but undeniably. Mariah hesitated, unsure of what to do. She wandered through the store, taking in the beauty of the pieces, but the looks from the staff made her feel out of place, small, insignificant. And then, as she approached the counter, she saw her. Lauren. The manager, a sharp-featured woman in her late 30s with perfectly styled hair and an air of condescension that seemed to radiate off her, glanced at Mariah from head to toe. Her lips twisted into a thin, mocking smile. Well, look what we have here, Lauren said with a sneer, her voice dripping with judgment. You really shouldn't be in here. Mariah felt her heart race as Lauren's gaze roamed over her, her simple dress, her worn shoes, the humility that clung to her every movement. It was clear that Lauren saw nothing of value in her, not her kindness, not her spirit, only her appearance. I just wanted to see the cross necklace in the window, Mariah said quietly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. She had always been a woman of quiet confidence, but something in this woman's tone made her feel as though she was invisible, unworthy of even the most basic respect. Lauren's eyes narrowed as she glanced over her shoulder at the display case. That necklace? Oh, I'm afraid that's not for people like you, she said with a laugh, clearly enjoying the discomfort she was causing. Mariah's chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't the necklace, it was the way Lauren said it. The way her entire demeanor seemed to convey that Mariah didn't belong. She wasn't good enough for the store, for the necklace, for anything. Before Mariah could say another word, Lauren snapped her fingers and a security guard appeared, looming over Mariah like a shadow. Ma'am, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave, the security guard said, his tone cold and detached, as if it were routine. Mariah was stunned, her mind reeling as they ushered her out of the store. Wait, please, she began, but her voice was swallowed by the harshness of their treatment. She was being escorted out, the doors swinging shut behind her with a heavy thud, and just like that, the humiliation hit her like a crashing wave. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over as she stepped into the cool air of the street outside, the world suddenly a blur as her heart broke. She sat down on a bench, her hands clutching her purse, trying to calm herself, but it was impossible. Her mind raced with questions. Why had they treated her this way? Why had she been so easily dismissed? She wasn't rich, no, but did that mean she wasn't worthy of respect? Wasn't she a child of God, just like everyone else? But as she sat there, broken and humiliated, something happened inside the store that Mariah couldn't have known. A man, dressed in an expensive suit, his face partly obscured by dark sunglasses, had entered the store just moments after her. As he scanned the shelves, he caught sight of Mariah through the glass door. His eyes lingered on her for a moment before something seemed to click. His hand paused midair, and he looked toward the counter where Lauren had just been smirking at Mariah, then back at the woman outside. The recognition was instant. He knew that face, and in that instant, everything would change. Have you ever been humiliated for no reason? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the pain we feel reveals a strength we never knew we had, and subscribe if you believe no one deserves to be treated like this, ever. No matter where you come from, you deserve respect. Mariah walked home that day in a daze, the weight of the humiliation pressing down on her chest. Her thoughts were a tangled mess of emotions. The cold sting of being tossed out of the store like an unwanted stranger. The laughter that echoed in her ears, Lauren's mocking tone still sharp in her mind. But most of all, the crushing realization that, in that moment, she had been nothing. Invisible. A nobody. Her husband, Ezekiel, had been away on a business trip when the incident happened, so Mariah entered their peaceful home alone. It was a beautiful house, a testament to his success, but as she stepped inside, the familiar walls offered no comfort. The stillness of the air felt suffocating. Mariah glanced at the kitchen table, at the vase of fresh flowers Ezekiel had bought her the previous week. She wanted to tell him everything, to let the pain spill out, but the words seemed to freeze in her throat. She put her purse down and moved through the house quietly, as if not to disturb the tranquility. She found her favorite spot by the window, the one where the sunlight poured in just right in the afternoon, casting a warm glow across the room. There, she closed her eyes, letting the silence surround her. But she couldn't escape the memory of that moment, the way the security guard had gripped her arm, the way Lauren had looked at her as if she were beneath her, beneath everyone in that store. It wasn't the first time Mariah had been made to feel that way. She closed her eyes, and the memories of school flooded back. The cruel taunts of classmates, the whispers behind her back, the feeling that no matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. Always too quiet, too plain, not smart enough. Why can't I just fit in? She used to wonder, as if some part of her would always be broken. When Ezekiel returned home later that evening, he noticed the difference in her immediately. Mariah was quieter than usual, her smile weaker, her eyes distant. She tried to hide it, but Ezekiel could see right through her. He had always known when something was wrong. She'd done it before, hid her pain behind a soft smile, pretending everything was fine. "Hey," Ezekiel said gently, his eyes searching her face, "is everything all right?" Mariah forced a smile, trying to hide the ache in her chest. "It's nothing. I'm fine," she said softly, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. He didn't push her. Ezekiel was a patient man, and he trusted that when she was ready, she would share. But there was a sadness in her eyes that unsettled him. He kissed her forehead and held her close, offering what comfort he could, but Mariah could feel her own resolve slipping. She hadn't told him about the Jade store, about the way she'd been treated. She hadn't shared how deeply it had cut her, how it felt to be nothing more than a face in the crowd. Days passed, and Mariah tried to put it behind her, but the memory lingered, gnawing at her. It wasn't until she was invited to a church member's home one Sunday that everything came crashing down. The invitation had come casually, an afternoon get-together. Mariah agreed, trying to push her feelings aside. But when she stepped into the home, something caught her eye across the room, a glimmer of green in the light. There, resting in the display case on the mantel, was the same jade cross necklace. The one she had admired in the store. The one she had been cruelly told was not for people like you. Her heart sank as she stared at it. For a brief moment, she thought she might faint. It was the same necklace, its smooth jade surface shining with the same brilliance as it had in the store window. Only now, it was in the home of a woman from church, a woman who, like most of the others in the room, had never seen her as anything but the quiet one. Mariah's hand trembled as she reached for her purse. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't about the necklace. It was about what it represented, the wealth, the status, the judgment she had been made to feel because of who she was. What had she done wrong? Why had she been cast aside, treated like she didn't belong, when all she had ever wanted was to fit in, to be seen? Tears welled up in her eyes, and before she could stop them, they spilled over. Mariah quickly wiped them away, excusing herself with a tight smile, pretending nothing was wrong. She stepped outside onto the porch, needing air. Her chest felt tight, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the familiar sting of shame. The shame she had carried with her all through school, through her life, never good enough, never seen for who she truly was. In that moment, she whispered a prayer beneath her breath. Lord, I don't want riches. I just want to be seen. I want to know that I matter, that I am enough. She stood there for a long time, the wind stirring the air around her. And for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of God's presence with her, a reminder that she was not invisible, not to Him. Comment, you're enough, if you know someone who needs to hear this. We all deserve to be seen and loved for who we are. If you've ever had to hide pain behind a smile, this story is for you. Stay with me. We'll see how this all unfolds. Days passed, but the pain from that humiliating encounter at the Jade store remained etched in Mariah's mind. She tried to focus on her duties, helping Ezekiel with his work, attending church, and caring for their home, but the sting of what had happened refused to leave her. And though Ezekiel could sense the weight on her shoulders, he had no idea what truly caused it, until one evening, when everything changed. Mariah had just finished preparing dinner, the smell of baked chicken and garlic filling the kitchen, when Ezekiel walked in, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an intensity she hadn't seen before. His eyes were narrowed, focused, and there was a deep seriousness to the way he moved. Mariah, he said quietly, his voice steady but with an edge of concern. I need to talk to you about something. She turned to face him, her heart tightening. What's wrong? Someone from that Jade store, Lauren, the manager, she recognized you, Ezekiel continued, his words careful. She sent me a message. Mariah's stomach dropped. What? Why? Ezekiel met her gaze, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't place. Because I own the store. Mariah froze, her breath catching in her throat. You what? Ezekiel's face softened as he stepped closer. I own the entire empire, the Jade business, the stores, everything, including the one where you were treated that way. Mariah's world seemed to tilt on its axis. All this time, she had no idea. She had never once suspected that her husband was anything more than the humble, soft-spoken man she knew him to be. They lived simply, away from the pressures of wealth, in a modest home that had always been filled with love and warmth. She knew he was successful, but the extent of his wealth, the breadth of his influence, it all seemed so far removed from the man she knew. Ezekiel didn't look angry. He didn't seem upset, not in the way Mariah had expected. Instead, he looked thoughtful, almost as if he was weighing something heavy on his heart. He sighed deeply before speaking again. I'm not going to blow up in anger, Ezekiel said quietly, his voice firm but with an undercurrent of sadness. I've worked too hard for this to let it turn into something ugly. But what happened to you? That wasn't right. Mariah was still reeling from the shock. But why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice soft, a mixture of confusion and hurt. Why hide it from me? Ezekiel stepped forward, his hand gently reaching for hers. Mariah, the truth is, I never wanted you to feel that weight. You've always been so beautiful in your humility, so grounded. I never wanted you to see what I've built as something to be proud of, something that could define us. I wanted you to know me for me, just Ezekiel. Not for my wealth, not for the business. Mariah stared at him, trying to understand. He wasn't like the men in the business world she had seen before. He didn't care about appearances, didn't flaunt his success. But this revelation, this truth about who he really was, it sent a rush of emotions flooding through her. As they sat down together in the quiet of their living room, Ezekiel began to share a part of his past that Mariah had never known. His voice grew soft as he spoke of a time before their life together, before the riches, before the success. I wasn't always this man, he said, looking down at his hands, the weight of the memories heavy in his voice. I wasn't born into wealth. I didn't have a family to guide me. There was a time, many years ago, when I was homeless, living on the streets of New York City. I didn't know where my next meal would come from. I was lost, angry, broken. Mariah sat still, listening intently, her heart aching for the man she had married, for the struggles he had endured before they had even met. One day, a Christian woman found me, Ezekiel continued, his eyes distant as if reliving that moment. She took me in, gave me a place to stay, and fed me. She showed me the love of Christ when I had nothing. And she gave me something that has stayed with me to this day, a small jade pendant. She told me it was a symbol of hope, that God would always provide, that His grace would be with me. Ezekiel paused, his voice thick with emotion. That woman changed my life. I never forgot her kindness. And when I finally started building my business, I knew it had to be done with the same kind of grace and humility she had shown me. I wanted to create something that would uplift others, that would honor God, and not just be another empire of wealth. Mariah's eyes filled with tears as she reached out and took his hand, understanding now the depth of his heart, the foundation upon which he had built everything they had. The Jade business, he continued, wasn't about status for me. It was about the message of grace. It was about doing things the right way, with love, and using my wealth to make a difference. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I allowed the pride of success to cloud my vision. Ezekiel looked at Mariah, his eyes full of sincerity. I'm going to make this right, Mariah. No one should ever feel like you did that day, not in my stores, not in my world. I promise you, I will handle this with grace, the way I should have from the start. Mariah nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of awe and gratitude. She had married a man who, though wealthy, had never let that wealth define him. And now she saw the fullness of his character. The heart of a man who had risen from nothing, not just for himself, but to share the love of Christ with the world. Ever been blessed by a stranger? Share your testimony in the comments. Let's celebrate the power of kindness and grace in our lives, and subscribe if you believe in kingdom wealth that glorifies Jesus. A wealth built on humility, grace, and love. In the days that followed, Ezekiel's investigation took him deeper into the heart of his business than he ever expected. He began to uncover something far more disturbing than the isolated incident at the Jade store. As he dug into the practices of the empire he had spent years building, the truth became undeniable. The mistreatment wasn't just isolated to one store. It was a systematic problem, ingrained in the very foundation of the company. At several other locations, employees had been following the same discriminatory behavior, treating customers with contempt based solely on their appearance, their clothes, their perceived worth. It wasn't just a mistake or a one-time incident. It was part of a culture that had silently taken root, one that Ezekiel had overlooked in his pursuit of growth and success. The discovery hit Ezekiel hard. He had built this business with the intent to be a force for good, but in his blind pursuit of expansion, he had allowed greed and pride to creep in. It wasn't just a betrayal of Mariah, it was a betrayal of everything he had ever hoped to stand for. As he sat in his office late one evening, reviewing more reports and hearing more stories from the employees, the weight of it all felt unbearable. His hands trembled as he placed the papers down. The empire he had spent years building, the empire that had allowed him to rise from nothing, was now staring back at him in the form of this ugly truth. And in the midst of all this, Mariah felt the weight of the situation even more intensely than he did. She was the catalyst for everything that had come to light. The innocent act of walking into a store, seeking a simple piece of jewelry, had opened a door to a painful revelation. I never wanted this, she whispered one evening, sitting on the edge of their bed, her hands wringing together in distress. I just wanted a necklace, something simple. I didn't know it would lead to all of this. Ezekiel, hearing the guilt in her voice, moved closer to her. His hand found hers, holding it gently, as if grounding her to the truth. Mariah, you didn't cause this, he said, his voice tender yet firm. This wasn't your fault. You didn't know what was hidden in the darkness of the business. You simply wanted to be treated with dignity, like anyone else. But Mariah couldn't shake the feeling of responsibility that pressed on her chest. She had never asked for anything extravagant, never expected special treatment. She just wanted to be seen, to be valued. And yet, in that single, heart-wrenching moment, it felt like her desire for respect had unraveled something much larger than she could have ever imagined. The realization made her feel small, insignificant, like the problem she had uncovered was all her doing. Ezekiel saw the torment in her eyes, the shame that had taken root deep in her heart. She had always been the strong one, the one who uplifted others, the one who gave without asking for anything in return. And yet, here she was, broken by the weight of an unjust world. But he wasn't going to let her carry that burden alone. You didn't cause this, Mariah, he repeated, his words soft but filled with conviction. God just used you to reveal what's been hidden. This wasn't about the necklace. It was about truth coming to light. He paused, allowing his words to settle in the air between them, before continuing, his voice becoming more resolute. We can't fix what we don't know is broken. And now that we know, we can begin to heal it. Mariah nodded slowly, her tears threatening to spill over, but Ezekiel wasn't finished. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and in the quiet of their home, he began to pray. Lord, let truth shine through the cracks, Ezekiel prayed, his voice steady and filled with a deep, abiding faith. Even if it shakes what we've built, let the brokenness be healed, not just in our business, but in our hearts. Use us to show the world what true grace and justice look like, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. Mariah, feeling the weight of his words, joined him in prayer, her voice trembling but strong. Lord, I don't want to feel broken anymore. Heal me, heal us. Help us do right by those who have been hurt, by those who have been overlooked. Use this moment to bring us closer to you. We trust you. They prayed together, the bond between them growing stronger as they leaned into their faith. In that sacred moment, something shifted. The shame that had been festering in Mariah's heart began to lift, replaced by a deep, unwavering peace. She may have been the catalyst, but she wasn't the cause. The cause was a broken system, one that had been hidden in plain sight, and now it was time for it to be healed. As they finished praying, they sat together in the quiet, knowing that this was only the beginning. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they had the truth on their side. And with that truth, they would fight not just for justice, but for redemption. Do you believe God uses the weak to shame the strong? Type, He does, and let's celebrate His power, and if you're still watching, comment, still here. So I know you're writing this story with me. Together, we can make a difference. The days following their prayer together were filled with a quiet, resolute energy. Ezekiel knew what needed to be done. He had spent years building an empire, but he also knew that no amount of wealth or power could ever stand against the truth. And the truth was about to come to light. Mariah could feel the tension in the air. She understood Ezekiel's resolve, but she feared the confrontation. Her heart wasn't made for public spectacle or drama. She had always preferred quiet acts of kindness over grand gestures. She had hoped that this situation might resolve itself, that the pain would simply fade away with time. But Ezekiel wasn't going to let it go unnoticed. This wasn't about saving face, it was about redemption. I won't make a scene, Mariah, Ezekiel said, his voice calm and steady as he prepared for the confrontation. He wasn't angry, though the injustice of it all could have fueled a rage within him. Instead, he was unwavering, grounded in something deeper. I'll let the truth do the talking. But Mariah was still hesitant. She didn't want to be the center of attention, to feel like the eyes of the world were on her once again. The humiliation, the shame, it still lingered in her soul, though she had tried to let it go. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about all the people who had been wronged. She stood by his side, watching as Ezekiel gathered himself, preparing for what would come next. He walked towards the door of their home, but before he left, he turned to Mariah and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. You don't have to come with me, he said, his voice gentle yet firm. But know that I'm doing this for all the Mariah Stones out there who feel unseen. For all the people who have been dismissed and judged because of their appearance, their wealth, their worth. We are all made in His image. I won't let this stand. And so, with a final look toward her, he stepped out the door. Mariah, torn between fear and hope, stayed behind. She prayed, once again, for strength, for peace in whatever happened next. She didn't know what Ezekiel had planned, but she trusted him. She trusted the man she had married, the quiet, devout man who had always known how to be a light in the darkest of places. Ezekiel arrived at the Jade store later that day, with cameras rolling discreetly in the background. He wasn't there to shout or demand apologies. He wasn't there to throw his weight around. His plan was much simpler, much more powerful. He was going to walk in and let the truth unfold. As he stepped into the store, time seemed to freeze. The employees, who had once treated him like just another customer, another wealthy businessman, paused. The air in the store shifted. There was a brief moment of stunned silence, and then the whispers began. Is that him? Someone muttered. Isn't that the owner? Another voice trembled. Ezekiel walked calmly through the store, his eyes scanning the faces of the employees who had mocked his wife, the ones who had thought themselves above others. The same employees who had turned her away, who had belittled her for her appearance. There was no need for grand gestures, no need for yelling. His mere presence was enough to let them know who he was and more importantly, who they were. As he reached the counter, the manager, Lauren, the one who had mocked Mariah just days earlier, stood frozen, her face draining of color. She knew exactly who he was now. She had seen him at the company events, on the rare occasions that she paid attention. She had heard his name whispered in the corridors, but she had never once connected the quiet, humble man to the owner of the empire she worked for. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Ezekiel's gaze was steady, unwavering. "I'm Ezekiel Stone," he said, his voice soft but carrying authority. "I own this store, and I've been made aware of what's been happening here." Lauren's eyes darted nervously toward the other employees, but they were equally silent, too afraid to make a sound. The room felt smaller with each passing second, as if the walls were closing in around them. They all knew what was coming, but none of them dared to speak. Mariah's face flashed in Ezekiel's mind, and he thought about the pain she had endured. He thought about the countless others who had walked into this store, only to be treated as if they didn't matter. This was bigger than one moment of humiliation. It was a reflection of a culture of arrogance, a culture that needed to change. He turned to the security guard, who stood by the door. "I want all of you to know that your actions will not be tolerated. There's no place for discrimination or judgment in this company. Not now. Not ever." The security guard nodded, sensing the gravity of the situation, but still unsure of how to react. Ezekiel's eyes softened, and he continued. "And as for Lauren, you've done more than hurt my wife. You've hurt this business. But there's grace for you, just as there's grace for all of us. I pray you find the strength to reflect on your actions. I'm letting you go today, but your actions will follow you, as they always do. Choose wisely moving forward." As Ezekiel turned to leave, the room remained eerily quiet, the reality of his words settling into the employees' hearts. The shock, the disbelief, they couldn't wrap their minds around what had just happened. But Ezekiel's message was clear. The truth had come, and it was far more powerful than any petty attitude or small-minded judgment. What would you do if you were in Mariah's shoes? Comment below and share your thoughts on how you'd handle this situation. Subscribe, because what happens next will leave you speechless. As Ezekiel walked to the center of the store, he didn't need to raise his voice. There was a weight in his presence that made everyone fall silent, and the moment he spoke, they listened. It was as if the air had thickened with the gravity of what was about to unfold. His words cut through the tension like a blade, steady and deliberate. "I need all of you to come up here," he called out, his voice unwavering. One by one, the staff members began to shuffle forward, their faces pale, their bodies stiff with anxiety. They knew what had happened. They knew the consequences were coming. And yet, there was a sense of disbelief that clung to the air. How could they have been so wrong? Ezekiel's eyes scanned the room, and he locked onto Lauren, the manager who had mocked his wife, who had belittled Mariah when she came to the store with nothing but a desire to simply buy something beautiful, something special, something to hold on to when the world seemed cold and indifferent. Lauren had taken that moment from her, humiliated her, and now the time for reckoning had come. "Lauren," Ezekiel said, his voice low but filled with a quiet power, "you called my wife trash. What does that make you?" His words hung in the air, every employee now fully aware of who they were dealing with. This wasn't some wealthy businessman. They were standing before the man who owned their livelihoods, the one who could erase them from existence with a simple decision. Lauren trembled, her face flushed with shame. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She had no excuse, no defense. And just when it seemed the room couldn't get any more tense, a quiet voice broke through. Mariah stepped forward, her eyes filled with calm and grace, the very embodiment of the forgiveness that only comes from true strength. She didn't look at Lauren with hatred. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked at her with something that was much more powerful: empathy. "I forgive you," Mariah said, her voice steady, her hands clasped together in front of her. "But this company stands for something greater than all of us." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. She wasn't here for revenge. She wasn't here to see anyone destroyed. What she wanted, what she had always wanted, was justice with grace. Redemption. Ezekiel stood by her side, watching her closely. There was no anger in her expression, no desire to see Lauren suffer. She had come to know the deep well of grace that only comes from walking through the fire and coming out stronger. And in that moment, she had proven that strength not just to Ezekiel, but to every person standing there. "Because of what you did, Lauren," Ezekiel continued, "I can't overlook this. I can't let it slide." He turned to the others in the room. "There are consequences to the way you treat people. There are consequences when you degrade someone, especially someone who is made in God's image. And then, the room held its breath as Ezekiel made his decision. "Lauren," he said, his voice solemn but resolute, "you're fired." The words echoed through the store like a final judgment. There was no debate, no second chances. The line had been crossed, and it was time for her to leave. But then, something remarkable happened. Rather than anger, rather than the usual chaos that follows such a moment, there was a stillness. The others watched, unsure of what to expect next. And Ezekiel continued, his voice now carrying the force of a true leader, a man of integrity, someone who knew how to blend justice with mercy. "But not everyone here is responsible for this," he said, turning toward the rest of the staff. "There are those of you who treated my wife with kindness. There are those of you who saw her for who she truly is, not for how she looked or how she was dressed. And because of that, you're being rewarded." The shock was evident as a few of the staff members, those who had stood by Mariah, who had treated her with dignity, were called to the front. Ezekiel smiled at them, and in that moment, they knew what this meant: promotion. They had shown mercy when they could have chosen indifference. They had demonstrated something more powerful than a paycheck could ever offer. They had chosen to honor the heart of a person, not just their outward appearance. From now on, Ezekiel continued, his tone changing to one of determination, this company will be grounded in kingdom values. Every person who steps through these doors, every customer, every employee, will know that they are valued. This isn't just about selling Jade or making money. It's about building a community of dignity and respect. It's about showing grace when it's hardest to do so. From now on, we live out these values. The employees who remained stood taller, their posture shifting as they realized what Ezekiel was saying. This wasn't just a company. This was a mission. And they were being called to something greater than just their jobs. Mariah looked at Ezekiel, her heart swelling with pride. She had prayed for this moment. She had prayed for a breakthrough. But she had never imagined that God would use her, not just for her own redemption, but for the redemption of an entire company. Justice with mercy. Comment, "Grace wins" if you agree with how Mariah handled this. Share this story with someone who needs to see what true power looks like as we continue this story. Months had passed since that fateful day at the Jade store, but for Mariah, the ripples of that moment were still reverberating through every corner of her life. The pain, the rejection, it had all led to something far greater than she could have ever anticipated. What had begun as a simple desire to purchase a piece of jewelry had turned into a story of divine transformation, not just for her, but for everyone involved. Ezekiel's company had flourished in ways no one could have imagined. But it wasn't the wealth or the success that gave him satisfaction, it was the values they were now living by. The company had become a beacon of hope, a place where people were treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who they were. And at the heart of it all, Mariah stood, not as the wife of the CEO, but as a powerful woman in her own right, now leading the company's women's empowerment outreach. Mariah's voice, once quiet and often overlooked, was now heard in churches, at conferences, and in boardrooms. She spoke about the rejection she had faced, not just from a store, but from a world that often values people based on appearances or status. She spoke of God's grace, His faithfulness, and how He had used her pain to bring about something beautiful. She told her story of redemption with such authenticity that people felt her words deep within their hearts. She remembered that moment of prayer, the one where she had stood beside Ezekiel, asking God to let truth shine, even if it meant shaking everything they had built. That prayer had been answered in ways that Mariah had never imagined. One day, while she was sorting through some letters in the office, she came across a simple envelope with her name written in neat handwriting. There was no return address, only the words "For Mariah Stone." She opened it slowly, unsure of what to expect. As she read the letter, her breath caught in her throat. It was from Lauren. "Dear Mrs. Stone," it began, "I cannot express enough how deeply sorry I am for my actions. When I treated you with such disdain, I thought I was better than you. I thought I could look down on you, judge you, and belittle you. But the truth is, I was the one who was blind." The letter went on to explain how Lauren had struggled with pride and self-righteousness, but the events at the Jade store had shattered her illusions. Lauren had sought counsel from a local pastor and had found Christ. "What I did to you is wrong," she wrote, "and I will spend the rest of my life making it right. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Tears welled up in Mariah's eyes as she finished reading the letter. Her hands shook slightly as she placed it down. How could she be angry? How could she hold on to resentment when Lauren's life had been so radically changed by the very incident that had nearly broken her? She knelt beside her chair, her heart heavy with compassion. "Lord, thank you for using my pain to bring someone else to you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for showing me that forgiveness is always the answer." It was then that the powerful truth settled in her heart, the truth that God sometimes uses the very things that break us to open doors that bless others. The store that had rejected her had led her to a platform where she could speak hope into the lives of so many. The humiliation she had faced had given her a voice, one that spoke not of bitterness, but of healing. And now, the very person who had caused her pain had been transformed by God's grace, just as she had been. Sometimes, God uses the store that rejects you to open a door that blesses others, Mariah whispered to herself, the words resonating deep within her soul. Her journey, which had begun with rejection and shame, had turned into one of empowerment and purpose. She was now living the life God had always intended for her, a life where her voice mattered, where her story had purpose. And through it all, she had learned the most powerful lesson of all. God's plan is always greater than our pain. Ever had God use pain for purpose? Comment, He turned it around. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story of faith, justice, and restoration. The story of Mariah Stone was a testimony to the power of redemption, to the idea that God's grace can turn even the most painful situations into something beautiful. But this wasn't the end of her journey. No, this was just the beginning. Would you like to hear more of Mariah's story as it unfolds, as God continues to use her in ways she never imagined? Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. As the months went on, Mariah's life had been transformed in ways she could never have imagined. From the depths of humiliation and rejection, she had emerged as a woman of strength, grace, and purpose. Her journey of pain and restoration had reached places she never dreamed it would go, touching lives and inspiring others. But there was one final piece of her story that had been quietly unfolding behind the scenes, and it was about to come to light. One evening, as the couple sat on their porch overlooking the Texas sunset, Ezekiel turned to Mariah with a soft smile, his eyes filled with love and something else, something secret. "I have something for you," he said, his voice steady yet full of emotion. Mariah raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is it?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It was simple, understated, yet somehow it felt heavier than anything she had ever held. "This was meant for you from the moment we met," Ezekiel said, his voice thick with emotion. Opening the box slowly, Mariah's eyes fell upon a jade cross necklace. It was the same one she had admired all those months ago at the store, the one that had first sparked this entire journey. But this wasn't just any necklace. This one was different. It seemed to shimmer with a sense of history, of significance far beyond its appearance. "Ezekiel," Mariah whispered, her breath catching in her throat. "Where did you get this?" Ezekiel smiled, his eyes soft with love. "This belonged to the woman who saved me, who showed me that God's grace could transform even the most broken of lives. She was the one who took me in when I had nothing, when I was living on the streets. She gave me this necklace as a symbol of hope, of new beginnings." Mariah's heart swelled, understanding the depth of the story behind the necklace. "But why are you giving it to me?" Ezekiel's smile grew even softer. "Because I've been saving it, for the woman that God would call my wife. From the moment I met you, I knew you were that woman. You've shown me what true love is, what grace and forgiveness look like in the face of everything we've been through. This necklace isn't just a symbol of my past, it's a symbol of what God has done in our lives, together." Mariah's hands trembled as she reached for the necklace. She had no words. There was nothing that could capture the depth of emotion she felt in this moment. But then Ezekiel gently flipped the necklace over, revealing the engraving on the back. She leaned in closer to read it, her heart racing as the words came into focus. "To the one who makes me believe again." Tears welled in Mariah's eyes as she read the engraving. She had never felt so loved, so seen, so deeply known. In this single moment, every pain, every hardship, every tear she had shed seemed worth it, because this was the love that had grown from those broken places. This was the redemption she had prayed for. As she looked up at Ezekiel, her heart full to overflowing, he took her hands gently in his and whispered, "You made me believe again, Mariah. You showed me what it means to trust God even when everything seems impossible." and I will spend the rest of my life showing you that you are always worthy of love." Mariah blinked back her tears, overwhelmed by the depth of his words. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet beauty of their home, with the fading light of the sunset casting a golden glow over everything, she knew this was her story of redemption. This was the story of a love that transcended every obstacle, every challenge, and every fear. This was the love that had been written by God's hand. Would you wear that necklace? Comment, "Yes, I would." The journey that had begun with rejection had now come full circle, revealing something more beautiful, more profound than either of them could have ever dreamed. It was a story of pain and triumph, of brokenness and healing, of judgment and grace. But above all, it was a story of love, a love that had the power to turn even the darkest moments into the brightest of futures. And it was a love that would continue to shape their lives, together, for all of eternity. Have you ever been underestimated? Written off by those around you, made to feel small or insignificant, only to realize that God was writing a far greater story behind the scenes? A story of purpose, of redemption, and of a love that could never be stolen or taken away. The journey of Mariah and Ezekiel is a story of God's timing, of how one seemingly small act of kindness, one simple, heartfelt prayer, could transform a life in ways that no one could have predicted. A journey where the rejected one became the cornerstone, and the pain that once seemed to define her life became the backdrop for her greatest victory. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it the pain of rejection or the power of forgiveness? Was it the way God used one small moment to change everything? We want to hear your thoughts. Your voice matters here. And don't forget to like, comment, turn on notifications, subscribe, and share to the people you love. Because this story doesn't end here. It's far from over. And remember, sometimes the stone they rejected is the one God uses to change everything. The story may have ended, but the journey, for each person who watches, is just beginning.